Hi, everyone. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Welcome to the musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical Innertube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference. Today on the musical Innertube, we welcome back a great friend of the podcast, Katherine Ramsland. She's here to talk about her novel Dead-Handed, which is the third installment in the Nutcracker Investigations series. Katherine is different from other mystery writers, however, in that she brings in her very detailed expertise in forensic psychology into the writing and creation of her fiction. Katherine consults for coroners, teaches homicide investigators, and has appeared as an expert on more than 200 crime documentaries. She was an executive producer on Murder House Flip and A&E's Confession of a Serial Killer, BTK, the author of more than 1,500 articles. It hurts my writing hand to say that, and 73 books, including The Serial Killer's Apprentice and How to Catch a Killer. She also pens a regular blog for Psychology Today. Is that shadowboxing? Is it called shadowboxing?
Yes.
Beautiful name for a blog. It's almost as good as Musical Innertube. And we should congratulate Katherine. She is now an emerita professor at DeSales University in Center Valley, PA, where she teaches courses, but only online. Congratulations on all that, Katherine, and welcome back.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you guys.
So let's just start. I have so many questions, but let me start with the most easy question of all. How did you focus on Concord, Massachusetts as the setting for this book?
Well, a couple of reasons. I like weather, and the first two books one had a hurricane, the other had a tornado. I wanted a winter storm, and I had been to Concord in the MFA program I recently completed and noticed all the stuff, all the writers, Emerson, Alcott, Thoreau. I learned how to say his name, Thoreau. Not
no,
Thoreau.
Everyone says it wrong.
And of course, Hawthorne. And Hawthorne then became thematic for me. So it's such an interesting town for its history, and also is where the American Revolution started. So it just was the natural place. And it was also the place I was when I sold the 3-book contract for this series.
There you go. Let me say also that when you go out and purchase this book, dear listener, I would suggest reading it right away, but then putting it on the shelf and picking it back up at Halloween, because this book has everything for Halloween. It's got dark and dusty mansions. It's got family intrigue. It's got graveyards and gravestones, and it's got a New England forest setting. And it'll probably run chills up and down your spine, which is exactly what you need at Halloween.
Yeah.
So I want to make that recommendation right up top. Katherine, you've taken your main character, who's kind of loosely based on yourself, and put her in the middle of not only all of the goings on, but a lot of family mysteries that were hinted at in the earlier books that kind of come together in this one. Was that the plan all along, is to kind of gradually ease the reader into this mixed up family that Annie, your heroine, is involved in?
I had no idea Annie had this family. None at all. I wanted to do something Hawthornian, and the House of Seven Gables and the two families that are intertwined and with the curse and all that. And I also had always wanted to write about this particular place in Connecticut called Dudleytown. And so all the stuff about Dakertown in my novel is actually about a real piece of property. So the two things seem to come together for me. I just say something about the title, Dead-Handed, because I had written that phrase down several years ago as something I wanted to use. I had no idea it was a real estate term for the influence of past generations on current generations over land transactions. And it was such a perfect fit. And then Hawthorne has a story about a birthmark and on a woman's cheek. And it was like, oh my God, all these things are working perfectly. And I did not plan that. So the same with Annie's family. I did not know. I discovered a lot as I went through this novel.
So Annie is your sort of central character, your protagonist, but Annie Hunter is never alone. And one of the things that's very different about this series, I think, and I'd love you to talk about this, is that Annie is the center of, and sometimes orbiting, and sometimes working directly with, and often on the phone or computer to, a small group of other forensic scientists who take different parts of the case that they're on. And that's very different for me. I'd not read a novel or any novels really that work like this, that when Annie has a problem that she doesn't have time to solve, she could just hand it off to her rough and ready sidekicks in a far off office who are waiting to do their research, to trace people, to backtrack them. And I think that back and forth is really, well, I think it's very singular. I haven't seen it before, but I'd love for you to talk about that, because it becomes, in a sense, that interplay becomes sort of a central character.
Yeah, well, it gets her out of her head. I mean, that's one of the death knells of a lot of fiction is you're always thinking about the character. In this way, everything's in dialogue. And also I can introduce, because there's a range of experts she works with, and I can introduce unusual ones like forensic meteorology. And I recently just actually met a forensic gemologist. So that will probably end up somewhere along the line. But she has a core team, dog handlers, based on someone I actually did work with, who keeps track of all her records and is able to look up stuff. And then she has a PI who then can do the kind of legwork, and a part-time digital examiner who is a friend of mine. Every time I need digital stuff. And I will say he's the one who came up with that really neat little trick at the end where they catch the bad guy. That was directly a result of him brainstorming with me about what can digital things do here. So I have this team because I myself, at all the investigations I've done, always have teams. There's sometimes as many as 20 people involved. So that way, Annie can always have like a forensic geologist, maybe a forensic, anthropologist. Any of those things are things that she can call on when she needs it for a particular case. And that way I can actually teach forensic stuff in the novels without it being a heavy-handed.
What does a forensic meteorologist do? Madam Author, yes, tell our listeners, because I am very certain that you passed over that very quickly. I would love to adumbrate what a forensic cloud spotter does.
Well, in the second novel, in The Damage Path, which is about has a tornado in it, Jolynn, the forensic meteorologist, brings in a tool to help find a body that they think is buried in the woods, and it's a real tool. And it has been used to spot marijuana fields and whatnot. And she flies it up on a drone. And it is able, with the help of cadaver dogs, is able to pinpoint the burial. At the end of the book, that novel, she has found a new potential case. So I kind of trapped myself into it. I'm not doing that again. I trapped myself into a storyline that I didn't think would work with the Concord line. And it turned out they came together in a very surprising way, unplanned, entirely unplanned. And so Jolynn ends up in Concord because she's following up on the weather-related deaths that appear to be accidents, turn out not to be accidents. And she's the one that is tracking them. And so that's what they do. They look at how does weather affect bodies outside. For example, that's called taphonomy. That's a forensic science, but the weather people can give you the conditions and how it might have affected time since death estimates, decomposition rates, etc. And I want to say one thing about, So in the beginning of the book, when Annie is sort of unconquered and wants to talk to her team and they're not around, one of her PI has been sent to an art class, a forensic art class, drawing from decomposed spaces for identification. And I just got invited to that class.
Oh, my goodness.
So I get to go and actually experience what Aiden learned.
Oh, my goodness.
This is life imitating art all the way down, doesn't it?
That's right.
Right.
I know that you've had a fascination with weather, as you mentioned. All of these Nutcracker books, and the Nutcracker theme comes from the fact that Annie and her team take on what look like impossible cases. So they call themselves Nutcrackers, or Annie calls the team Nutcrackers anyway. But all three books are entwined with weather. You have a hurricane in the first, tornado in the second. Now you have a really massive snowstorm here in the third one. Again, what is your fascination with weather, and how it would tie in to forensic stuff that you do?
Well, weather has a big impact on mood, pace, throwing up hindrances. Like when Annie needs to go get her daughter, now that they have to contend with icy roads. So you feel that sense of you have to get there as fast as you can, but you don't want to be in an accident. So it kind of ups the tension. Weather itself is I think, so interesting, but it brings in layers of things. Like with the hurricane, I found that there is such a thing as a hurricane that commits suicide. So like that was perfect for my theme in that novel. A tornado. I called the book In the Damage Path, because in the damage path of a tornado is how you learn its behavior. And that's what we do with serial killers. Same exact thing. So the snowstorm idea actually came from, I will admit, Peter Straub. I always loved his book Ghost Story. And I do start the book a little bit with reference to it, not remembering that there's a Hawthorne and a mall in that quote from Hawthorne that opens the book. So it was perfect. But then again, I didn't want them to be buried in snow and with power outages and stuff. I didn't want it to go that far. I just wanted the weather to be a way to sustain and build suspense. But also, Annie hates snow. She hates being in the cold. She hates snow, but then it ends up being her ally. So it's a way to flip her and her attitude, and to show her that all the stuff she's been fighting is actually what she should be using.
That's often the challenge, I should think, when you're in the midst of one of these rather elusive, complex cases, is to recognize your resistance to aspects of it and perhaps turn them to advantage as you try to take it apart.
Yeah, and I think in each novel, her attitudes are the things she has to re-examine in order to move forward. And, and it's weird because I don't actually plan it to be like that. It's not a formula, but clearly she has strong opinions, and those are the things that get in her way. And she teaches that. She talks about this is what happens in investigations and why they go off the rails as people develop these blind spots, and so does she. And so Natra, her closest assistant, is constantly reminding her, here's what you're not seeing, here's what you're not seeing, as well as the attorney, Jax, he comes in too, and they're able to give her perspective. But usually the story will turn on her ability to forget the attitude and figure out how is this to my advantage.
And there's something else about her personality that reflects, it comes to bear in this novel more than some of the others, because this novel has more of a horror aspect, a horror movie aspect. And there are a couple of times when she's thinking, this is where the horror movie woman gets killed, because she goes in here no matter what, and that's something I think about, not just with horror movies where you're saying, don't go in the basement, but also with heroes and heroines who sort of say, this isn't right. I'm going to go in there and check it out. And again, you sit back and say, do you really would I have the guts
Yeah.
to put all of my reservations aside and just walk right into this maelstrom. And she does that over and over again in all the books.
She so do I do that, by the way. She does it over and over because that is partly how she deals with scary things, is moving toward them. And that's actually something I learned from Anne Rice when I wrote her biography, and I talked with her a lot, is she had a tendency to do that as well. And it's a way of certain characters, I think, that some people just go, here's my way. But with her, in that particular instance about where she says this is what crazy people do, but if she doesn't do it, she could lose the biggest clue to the thing she most wants. So you're putting her in this situation where, yes, it's so stupid of you to go to get in the car with this crazy guy and go in there. But if you don't, that may be it for what you most want. So
yes,
she's always got that tension going.
And of course, one of the nice things about detective fiction is that these fixes, which investigators get themselves into, where they have to make decisions about what to do and what to walk away from, and a lot rides on it. These are workable metaphors for situations we all find ourselves in, and things we all have to do, sort of to wrestle with ourselves to, solve things.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's very reflective of the things that we often face, maybe not to the extreme what she does, but certainly I think she sort of models. Sometimes you just have to drop the attitude. Sometimes you have to change the way you're doing this.
I think also some of the more interesting passages in the book are the passages where she's talking to a newspaper reporter about the case, and he knows stuff and she knows stuff, but they don't necessarily know the same stuff, and they are trying to get that stuff that the other person knows that they don't. That I've seen that interviewing technique up close firsthand a couple of times when talking with officials about a news story, and they don't want to let something slip out that might harm the case. So they're talking around it. You must have gone through a number of these sort of interviews where there is a give and take or maybe a blockage on both sides to come up with that sort of situation in your books.
Yeah, I go through quite a lot, especially if I'm involved with the subject and, specifically, and somebody wants to get information and they have some advantage over me. So there's a trade, the trade-off is on the table, but how much can I trade it up? I actually, though, didn't know how much that guy knew. So the most amazing thing to me about this particular novel was the things that would come out of characters' mouths that I had not planned for them to say. And as I mentioned, I had the two storylines, and I wasn't at all sure how they were going to link up until one character said, "Oh, starfish." And then it went, "What does he know?"
Yes.
Turns out he knew a whole lot.
Yeah.
Yes,
but I didn't figure that into him when I created him as a character. And the same thing with that reporter. I had a specific thing I wanted him to be by the end, but then as it turned out, he was doling out all kinds of information that took me by surprise. But at the same time, I know Annie can't give to him. She wants stuff from him, but she can't give back to him. So she has to figure out that strategy. And that's certainly, you're absolutely right. I have been in that situation many times.
We'll return to our show in just a moment, but first, here's a soothing musical interlude.
Our guest, Katherine Ramsland, is an expert on many things, including crime scene investigation, psychological sleuthing, serial killers and mass murders, vampires, sex offenders, ghosts, and the writing process.
Katherine has written 73 books and 1,500 articles. She's participated in many crime investigations and runs the Shadowboxing podcast at Psychology Today. She's a frequent guest in the television and podcast world, including her work as executive producer on Roku TV's Murder House Split.
Among her nonfiction books are Confessions of a Serial Killer, The Criminal Mind, The Science of Vampires, True Stories of CSI, and Snap, Seizing Your Aha Moments.
Her fiction books include Blood Hunters, The Heat Seekers, and many others, including the Nutcracker investigation series. Dead Handed, the book we're discussing today, is the series' third and most recent installment.
For more on this truly Renaissance personality, check out Katherine's website at katherineramsland.net or her Facebook page at facebook.com/kath.ramsland.
And now we return you to the musical Innertube, already in progress. So I think we need to give a thumbnail sketch, sort of just an overview of the plot. I'm going to not give away any big things, and you can correct me as I move forward. This is going to be just really dumb, 10,000 feet up. But Annie comes to Concord on one case, and pretty soon she's trying to solve about 4. In fact, 5. In fact, 6. In fact, 7. There's a way in which this gets barnacled over because one case often leads to another. We all know this. And we find out that she is involved. Her family is involved. She has a dying grandfather and an absent father who she's been told is dead, but she's wondering if that's really true. So there's that. But there's also the possibility that she is investigating what's known as a suicide cluster, and at least at the beginning. Explain to us what a suicide cluster is.
Okay. Yeah, she came to Concord because her grandmother's ill. She reads about the suicide cluster in the newspaper. She knows that there are very few experts, even in the field of suicidology, who really understand that phenomenon. And she happens to be in the area, so she wants to get involved because she's just hanging there anyway. And this is her research. So her assistant sets up a meeting with the chief of police and one of the town officials to get her started as a consultant. And her consulting is really about what should towns do. A suicide cluster is where, and there's several different types, but a suicide cluster is where in a limited period of time, people begin to commit suicide, usually kids. And weirdly, it's often by places with railroad tracks. Often they're in affluent communities. It's high school and college kids primarily. They seem to mimic each other. And sometimes there's something called an echo cluster where there's been one 5 years before, 10 years before, or even 100 years before, and they're going through the motions of what had happened before. It's a really weird, mysterious kind of thing. People have tried studying it to figure it out, but what you're trying to, a lot of it is media involvement. So there's been a clear sense of causality with these clusters from papers covering it, memorials going up, romanticizing victims, etc. So with her knowledge, she gets involved, but very quickly figures out this isn't a suicide cluster. There's more to this story, and it all has to do with this particular property that has this old-time curse on it from, a couple of centuries before. And so is that what's going on? These kids know something, they're late teen years. So she has to figure that out. But she gets into the Dacretown thing through the suicide cluster, and then finds out that's not what it is.
We've had stories in the past, newspaper stories about people who die apparently from suicide. There's a big one going now in Philadelphia where there was a woman who was stabbed to death. She had 20 stab wounds, and they said it was a suicide. And the family is challenging that. When you go into a situation, and you may have gone into these before, where is it suicide? Is it homicide? What do you look for to tell the difference between those two things? Because that works out in the book too, where is it a suicide or is it a homicide? Yeah,
and I do this with Annie throughout because she is a suicidologist. it's really important to know the cases, and especially the weird ones, because I know of a case where a guy stabbed himself 98 times, and it was definitely a suicide. And the cops absolutely could not believe that anybody would do that. That's actually a cognitive bias of, if I wouldn't do it, he wouldn't do it. What they do. There's so many bizarre suicides. I collect them in part for the purpose of teaching. Just because she has a lot of stab wounds would not eliminate her as having killed herself by any means. So it has to be about how many stabs, what kind of stabs, like hesitation marks or not, not very deep ones. But I think that in the Philadelphia case, it had to do with where they are in the body that makes it really suspicious. And so it is definitely an interesting case, should be reopened, should be reexamined by an independent person. Absolutely. But it's not the number of wounds or the type of wounds that were automatically eliminated as a suicide. It's really, is it possible for that person to have done it? And we do find people stabbing themselves multiple times, or shooting themselves even several times, 3 or 4 times. If they don't get their shot off right, they'll shoot again and maybe again. So that when people automatically say, oh, that can't possibly be a suicide, it's because they're not familiar with the cases. And I've consulted on some cases in coroner's juries where I've had to say, but look at the literature. This is possible. Is it probable? You're weighing that against, is it possible? And what are the factors leading up to this person's death? What you have to look at, what other people knew about the person, what the decedent was going through, what their ability to buffer themselves against life's disappointments was. There's so many different factors involved that it's really complicated. It's called a psychological autopsy. And it's a complicated, time-consuming process. But if you want to get it right, you have to go through it. And that's what Annie's specialty is. It's what I taught as a course and continue to teach.
On the way in this book, we learn a lot about something I've been aware of thanks to my friendship with you, Kathy. But there are situations in which a person or persons sets up a kind of game or challenge in which they sort of position or invite or coax other people to harm themselves, possibly to kill themselves. And first of all, I'd like to know, in these games, what is the incentive for the person to participate? What kinds of incentives are set up?
Yeah, and they have a whole conversation about that. And all the challenges they name are real challenges, except for mine, except for the one I named.
The blue whale, I think you mentioned.
The blue whale challenge. The incentives depend on the person, but sometimes it's simply to get as many likes on their TikTok or Instagram as possible, because there are people with that kind of illness where they just have this deep need for attention to the point where they'll do very, very risky things. The choking game was to prove yourself, and people died doing something. That's where you have people actually choking you, and people die. Or sometimes it's like a self-asphyxiation kind of thing, and they underestimate just how dangerous it is.
Or something silly like that Tide Pod challenge.
Yes, exactly. And sometimes the blue whale was a succession of things you had to do up to the point where it was just so dangerous. I mean, you'd break your eardrum, you might break your arm. There are all these things you had to put yourself at risk because you had to prove yourself. You have an audience to whom you are proving yourself, and the more you can get, the better. And it's a bizarre social media phenomenon that people have to run for all these likes and comments and whatnot, and put themselves, they think of themselves as influencers, but they're not, particularly, especially if they die. But these challenges are like that. And so when my digital guy suggests maybe we're looking at one of these, now they talk about incentives, and it could be somebody has a lot of money. There's a big pot at the end, or you are affiliated with something larger than yourself. I mean, we're seeing a lot of cult-like behavior these days in politics, where people are doing all kinds of things that just seem so bizarre, but it's because they're affiliated with a cause or a mission or a group, and that has given them a sense of purpose. So Annie and her team have to figure out what could be the incentive for doing this kind of thing, and that's part of the mystery of it.
I think one of the tragic overlays in this story is that we have to think about how susceptible some folks are. How you only need to be a little bit shaky for this kind of call to have resonance for you and to be drawn to it.
There's many susceptibilities that make people really vulnerable to this kind of thing that the people who set them up don't think about or aren't aware of. It's really sad and tragic sometimes with people who get sucked into it.
Let's take a step back to your writing process, because something you said a little earlier is something that I've talked to other people who write about this situation, and that is you start with characters and a plot, and you're filling them in. And as you write the characters, it's weird, it's bizarre, but it happens constantly with authors, and that is the characters start telling you what they're going to say, how they're going to act. You have things set up, you have an outline, but the characters start dictating what they're going to do as you write. Is that sort of the case with yourself and this book and other books you've written?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I remember clearly the day I had this plot. I knew exactly what was going to happen. It was all, and none of that happened. When I sat down and wrote, none of it.
You do exactly the book you didn't write.
Exactly.
And this book, probably more than the other two, was really instinctive. Really, the characters that speak, and I didn't know what was going to happen as a result, to whether to write that down, because that was going to lead me in a certain direction that I couldn't see my way. And I thought, I'll just trust it, see what happens. And there were a number of things that happened, especially toward the end, that I did not know, but when they happened, it was perfect. Like it's my subconscious going, I'm the magician. If you believe this to me, and it will work out, just relax. But honestly, when I tried plotting it none of that worked. And even the characters that I thought they had certain roles, they ended up doing things that I didn't expect at all. So it was scary. That is not my way. I like to kind of see my sense of direction, but it was exhilarating at the same time to see these characters know where they wanted to go and how it was going to work out. And I just had to say, okay, I'm aboard. I hope it works out by my deadline.
This book did seem to have a lot more moving parts than your other books,
yes.
And a lot more input, because as John says, there's at least 4 or 5 cases working here, plus all of the involvement of her family, which she knows nothing about because her family has cut her off for years. But apparently there are strangers in this town that know more about her family than she does.
Including the fact that they know her father, who's been missing for 5 years. And she doesn't have any sense of, he grew up there. He's a person of influence. And lots of people know him, but she has no clue who these people are and what they know about him and how that, and whether or not he's even a dangerous figure in her life, because she begins to be afraid for her child who's there with her, but she's left in the care of a tutor and a babysitter. And now wondering, oh my God, is there going to be some danger to her? So she also has to grapple with that family legacy of the things this family has done to other people and how that really impacts who she is and the kinds of things she's chosen to do in a way that she didn't actually anticipate or know about. And she has to come to terms with that.
So this would not be a conversation with Katherine Ramsland if we did not discuss matters having to do with the occult, the otherworldly, the potentially otherworldly, the uncanny. And of course, Annie, throughout these books, has had occasion to say several times that while skeptical, she remains open on all these fronts, partly because, as a good investigator of her sort, she wants to pick up any signal that she can. And it would be a bad career move to actually shut down one side, say, oh, that never happens, and then have it happen and ignore it and not solve a case because of it. So she is skeptical but open. And in the meantime, a lot of uncanny stuff is happening. And it did remind me of Hawthorne a little bit in that the uncanny is everywhere. It's swirling around what people do. And it's definitely a fact in that world. If we look at, the Scarlet Letter or Young Goodman Brown, there's this notion of black magic, white magic. There's this notion of things that are happening that we cannot understand, and whether or not these get, completely explained. For example, one great example that you talk about was William James and his experiments with psychics,
right?
And in which he had the exact same attitude going in. And I remember reading that stuff and coming to the end and realizing that what he was trying to tell us in his way is, well, a lot of these people were frauds, but we didn't actually explain everything. There's a lot that sort of exceeded our capacity to find evidence and really make a judgment. And I think some of that is true in this book.
Well, and that's the value of Merrick, her aunt, great grandfather, or however many greats. And again, a big surprise. He crossed paths with Hawthorne's son, who goes into all this mysticism.
Right.
That's exactly what I needed for this book. And she, like me, she's open, but finds many of the wishful thinking kinds of things that go on with paranormalists and ghost hunters of today, can easily be knocked down. But taking it seriously, the William James angle, he had a whole movement of people testing all these mediums, and they found one woman that they tested in Boston over and over and over and could never figure out, how does she know these things? How was she able to do automatic writing, which Annie's father is all into, and some amazing cases. So she's not. That's why it's called Nutcrackers. The hard nuts to crack are those cases that have these elements that are often dismissed or overlooked, which she's willing to at least entertain, that as I am. And that's pretty much the theme of this whole series. Is it's not it doesn't accept that the paranormal definitely exists, but it recognizes there are things out there that are not easily explained. And the value of Aidan in some cases is he's always, well, what about that curse? It does seems like everybody really had some bad luck.
That was very funny when he says that.
Yeah.
He says, man, that curse.
Aidan is the private investigator that works with her.
Right.
And there's two things. He keeps talking about the curse, and every once in a while he looks up because her grandfather's dying, and she's been named in the will. And so he keeps saying, "You're going to come into some money? You're going to get some money?" He says that about 5 times.
Yes.
It's the whole thing. So,
well, he's only standing in for the readership,
Exactly.
the audience, who really want to know, is he going to make it? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And then, because he's a freelancer, he's not on, paying staff. He's a freelancer. He's also a jack of all trades. He fixes up houses in the Outer Banks. He's on search and rescue. He's all kinds of things. And he's kind of a loosey-goosey in terms of income, but he does need income. So yeah, that's and he's curious. He just goes ahead and says things. And he also has a competition with Annie. Who's going to be the first one to see a ghost?
There you go.
And he's that kind of character who's constantly pushing it back at her. He's not necessarily a believer, but he's aboard. If there's some kind of spooky thing happening, he'll go with it. As would I, by the way. If somebody said that to me, I'm all in.
I love it. Well, one thing you could definitely say about the uncanny is whether it gestures to things that really exist or not, it's a fact for people.
Yeah.
It's in their lives. And they do things because of it that brings it right center stage sometimes. And that's really present in this book, that sense that well, no matter what the uncanny is, whether it's factitious or not, people think it's real, and that's making them do stuff.
And really, where the centerpiece of this book, besides Dacretown, the property, the cursed property, is Sleepy Hollow Cemetery, because that is right in the heart of Concord, and it's not the Headless Horseman one, which is in New York. It's the first one, and it's this massive cemetery of all these really old, crumbly graves, and then they have a hill that's like where all the authors are buried. But wow, is that ever the setting, especially in winter, with the snow on it? And I mean, I had to use that. And it was so great when I asked some of the caretakers, because I needed a certain plot thing to happen. I knew the police were in there at night, work driving around, but in snow, they close it. And that was perfect.
Oh, there you go.
And that was a caretaker who told me, oh, yeah, here's our policy. And that worked.
Fits right in. Yeah. And the other thing is, I don't know how to put this without giving away anything in the novel. So I'll just say it's kind of weird that area had so many successful authors, successful and thoughtful authors, starting with Hawthorne, but also Thoreau. Thoreau. There we go. Okay. And Alcott, Louisa May Alcott is in there too.
Yeah, Alcott and her father were part of the Transcendental movement. Emerson.
So again, that area produced a lot of authors. Something in the water, maybe,
and they lived in each other's houses. That was the weird part.
Yes. Yeah.
Hawthorne had 2 houses. Alcott had 2 houses. They sort of all, knew each other. Now, Thoreau was out in the woods, sort of. When you really go see his kind of retreat, it's silly because he could have walked into town anytime, and his mother brought his lunch, and so he wasn't quite that big wilderness thing, right? He did his laundry, stuff like that. But
some hermit, right?
Hermit of convenience.
But yeah, I mean, and you're right, and it was this enclave of these romantic, transcendental thinkers that they believed that they should. It was almost like people having subscriptions today of fans who give them money to support them. They believed that they were pretty much entitled to that. Also, Hawthorne knew one of the presidents. They traveled together a bit. It was so weird. There's a lot of connections and interconnections, and also between Concord and Boston, because they were pretty close.
Well, Katherine Ramsland, we could go on forever, as per usual. Your latest novel, not your latest book. Your latest book, as you tell us, is Sonny Says Horse Sense from the Horse's Mouth, which, although it sounds like a kid's book, Don and I will be consulting it right after this show is over.
Okay.
There are actually philosophers in it, his ancestors, like Socrates.
Oh, very nice.
Xenoclitus.
Oh, no. Oh, my God. Who's the Chinese guy who does, the art of war?
Sun Tzu. Yep. Yeah. He is Sonny's ancestor.
Sun Fuchsius must be in there. Anyway.
Yes,
Sun Fuchsius. There you go.
Marrying Catherine's love of horses with John's love of puns.
But the book we've been talking about this entire session is Dead Handed, the third in the Nutcracker Investigations series. I thought it was Rip Snorter and really carried me away, not to be too punny about it. And you really should give it a read, and it'll give you a chill. And Katherine, I hope you come back soon to regale us with more of all the stuff you do, which is, there's so much of it. So thank you for coming back on.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was a blast. You guys are great. Great questions.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.